Welcome to Let's Be Honest. I'm Liana Ross, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm the assistant director of Good and Wellness Group, and I'm on a mission to answer your real and honest questions, unfiltered, while also giving you the real and honest opinions of a mental health clinician on pop culture and trending topics. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Let's Be Honest podcast. I'm Liana, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and this podcast is all about answering your listener questions and giving my take on trending topics and pop culture. So today's episode is a listener requested topic, which is myths of OCD. And just as a reminder to send your requests for topics to at Let's Be Honest Pod Instagram, or you can email them to letsbehonest@goodingwellness.com. So today, I needed someone who specializes in this, right? So I had to bring on Tanairy Fernandez, a licensed mental health counselor, the director and founder of Balanced Mental Health Counseling in Huntington, New York. And one of her specialties is OCD. Welcome, Tanairy.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you come on. So we're going to clear up 5 myths and set those straight with some facts and talk about the different ways OCD can appear, and as well as helpful treatment if it can be treated. So let's
Thank you. You know, whoever that listener was, kudos to them, because I don't think many people know that there are those myths. And so many people use OCD all the time, like nothing. So I think it's a great conversation to have. So thank you for taking that on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think I posted something on Instagram yesterday about OCD is not an adjective, and it's so commonly used that we forget what it actually is, or we don't even know what it is. It's overly used, which we'll talk about that as well. So what do you feel? Let's get into what do you feel like is the first myth you want to debunk?
It has to be the cleanliness and order. So everything related to cleaning and organization, right away people assume I have OCD. So just because you have a friend or you have a family member who's very cleanly and tidy does not mean they have OCD. I think that's like the biggest misconception with this disorder. We need to realize that OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is an actual severe mental illness. So someone who's enjoying cleaning and enjoying organizing their environment, they're enjoying it. That's not them feeling this fear, this extreme worry, and this extreme sense of like something terrible is going to happen. And it's not debilitating to their life. So when something is debilitating to the point where it's like, wow, there's something really going on, this is affecting your work, this is affecting your relationships, like that's when it's a problem. Like people are allowed to have organized skills. Like people are allowed to say, I'm a clean person. Like that's a personality trait. And I think we forget, we always try to mix things into like an adjective, right? Or something like that. So people are like, oh, that's so OCD. But no, it's just like, that's my personality. So I think that's the biggest misconception with OCD. So knowing like that OCD is something related to, like I said, extreme fear, one does not find it enjoyable. It can lead to extreme depression, like major depressive disorder. So it's not fun. OCD is not a fun thing to have, and it's not going to make your life better. Having OCD is actually the total opposite.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the idea of when it's debilitating and it's making your life unmanageable. And usually in most disorders, that's what's really setting it apart from something that is just like, okay, like it's a concern, maybe it's impacting my life or not, to something that's really like, is it impacting my work, my school, my family, my mental health? And I think it also limits us to the idea that OCD is only about cleaning.
Exactly.
Or that it's only about, I got to turn the light switches off and on.
Yes. And that's the other myth. So thank you for bringing that up. That OCD is just that. No, OCD has so many different forms that people are not even aware of. People misdiagnose OCD all the time because they may look at someone with, let's say, harm OCD and say, oh, this person is psychotic and they want to cause harm to someone, and, they're having homicidal ideation, which is totally not true. Harm OCD really is that someone has an extreme fear of harming someone, and they have these intrusive thoughts that they're going to cause harm to somebody. So this is common in the population I work with moms
Mm.
during the postpartum period. They have thoughts and intrusive thoughts that, hey, maybe I'm going to do something to my baby and harm them. I'm going to drop my baby, or I'm going to sexually touch my baby inappropriately when I'm changing their diaper. That has nothing to do with that they're actually going to do it. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. And people don't like to talk about it because you hear harm and it's like,
Yeah.
ugh, that's sticky, that's yucky. One of the biggest exposures with someone with harm OCD, someone who's like, I'm afraid I'm going to take a knife and stab somebody. Like, I don't know why, but I have these intrusive thoughts of knives, blah, blah, blah. Like, I
Mhm.
would have knives in my office and I would tell them, take the knife and put it on my wrist. Do it.
Mm.
Just go for it.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it. They're not criminals. They're
Right.
not psychotic. They're not out of this touch with reality. So I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of therapists, and even our community are like informed about. And there's other things like germs, right? We know
Mhm.
germophobia, right? We know things related to like if someone's a fear of vomit, like they don't want to
Yes.
get sick, they are afraid of getting sick, and if they get sick, they're afraid it's going to have them cause them to vomit, so they don't want to do that. It could be a body obsession, like someone could just have a very extreme focus on their body and they obsess, they check constantly on their body. There's different umbrellas of OCD, like there's skin picking, hair pulling, there's body dysmorphia disorder. Like this is all under OCD. These are all things that are very repetitive, obsessive behaviors. So that's like one of the biggest ones I wanted to bring up when it came to like, it's not just about cleaning and
Mhm.
organizing.
That's so huge. And I actually just learned about relationship OCD, which I
Yes,
didn't know
that's another
about.
one.
And like, there's all these subsets. And like you were saying, like with the person with, let's say, the knife and fearing that they were going to stab
Yes,
someone, it's like that intense, intrusive thought. And I
exactly.
also know it's hard to differentiate between those intrusive thoughts and like our average thoughts or normal thoughts.
Yes. And that leads to the third one, the third myth.
Mhm.
A lot of people who have been with OCD for a long time, let's say they say like, I'm pure O. Like I just have obsessions. I don't have compulsions.
Oh,
And a lot of times, even providers, when we diagnose on the DSM, it actually says you can just have obsessions
what?
and still have OCD, which is totally not true. Because when you really dig in deep and you really evaluate the client, you realize that they're having mental compulsions. Like they're not necessarily need to be cleaning or tapping their hands or doing some type of ritual that you can visually see. It
Mhm.
could be mental. It could be that mentally they're praying constantly over and over again. It could be that they're saying the same phrases, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay, like 20 times in their head. So there's times that there's things that are happening mentally that are a compulsion that people are not aware of. So sometimes clients will just say, no, I don't have any compulsions. I just obsess. I just have a lot of obsessions and that's it. So that's another big one.
That's very interesting that like from the outside it could be you wouldn't even know what's going on, right? I mean, most of the time you don't, but
Right.
that the compulsions could be very much like internally and like you said repeating something or even like I know that, if there's an OCD with like fear that they're going to hurt someone, it could be like
Mhm.
obsessively driving around, making sure that there was, that they didn't actually hit someone or hurt someone.
Mhm.
So it's very easy to almost slide those compulsions under the radar. And I never even knew that people can just say, oh, I just have obsessions. I mean, then that's like, is it anxiety or is it OCD? And like until you kind of
Exactly.
delve further and you're like, oh, okay, there's compulsions here. We might have not labeled it as a compulsion.
Mhm. Exactly. That's totally so it is a lot. And I think that's why it's so nice that you're talking about this because a lot of clients get misdiagnosed. They may get diagnosed as generalized anxiety or social phobia. And then they realize that, wait, I've been in treatment for this X amount of time and I'm still doing the same things I've been doing. So I think when someone goes to someone who specializes in OCD, we really trigger what is going on. And we notice, like, wait a minute, this is what you're doing and this is why the cycle is happening. OCD is very repetitive. It's just a cycle. Once you finish one thing, another one pops up. So if you're doing traditional therapy, which is another myth, right?
Yes.
That maybe just talk therapy can be helpful. It's not. Like you really need to do exposure response prevention or something similar to that. Because the reality is that if you just do talk therapy and you really focus on, I'm going to give you an example. Like if you go and focus on a mom who's postpartum and you're like, okay, she's having a lot of obsessions about her baby
Hmm.
and if she causes harm to her baby. If you tell her, okay, those thoughts are normal, they're intrusive thoughts, blah, 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 and you don't focus on actual exposures or getting them used to it, what's going to happen when the baby gets older? She's going to feel more comfortable and she's going to be like, okay, I'm not going to do this to my baby. My baby's fine. I feel comfortable with them. But then it's something else. They may start
Mm.
obsessing about people taking care of this baby. And then that becomes an and then they may obsess over other things in the household. So we need to know that OCD does not go away. It just goes from one thing to another if AKA the first thing was treated. So that's a big misconception and a myth that, okay, just take therapy, just go to therapy. But it's not just going to therapy, it's getting the right treatment that is effective with OCD.
So it's very much like whack-a-mole, like where, and it's similar to addiction, where like, okay, maybe I got sober, but then now I'm like having food eating issues or issues with food. Same thing
Mhm.
like this. It's like, okay, if the obsessions towards touching my baby goes away, it never really goes away. It kind of just manifests differently.
Exactly. In different things. It just pops up. So you may say, like, I feel better in that area, but then there's all the areas in your life that really are still debilitating.
Wow. Okay. So that's why it's so important to find someone who is trained in OCD, trained in ERP, you said?
Yes, ERP, so exposure response prevention, which is really hardcore. So I think a lot of times people who have done it in the past may be a little hesitant at first because it's extreme. Like you're doing the things you fear the most, right?
Yes.
But it does not mean you're doing fear factor. Like we're not
Mhm.
here to say, I'm gonna put a spider and just put it on your face and that's it. You're gonna get over spiders. Like it really is a gradual exposure. And I think every ERP therapist is different. Like I come from the school of thought of like I am where the client is. Even though I'm a
Mhm.
very extreme behaviorist, it does not mean that I'm going to impose anything on you that isn't okay. Like
Yes.
I'm not going to make you do anything I'm not going to do. So if I'm not going to go in front of the street and put myself right in front of a car, you're not going to do that either. Like we're going
Right.
to do things that actually make sense. The goal of treatment is for you not only to tolerate but to accept that things are, uncertain in life, that we're not always going to know what's going to happen in life. If I had that crystal ball, right, that told me what was going to happen 5 years from now, I would give everybody,
That'd be
the advice of what
fantastic.
is going to
Yes.
happen. But since I don't have that and you don't have that, we need to live with the idea of like, I don't know what tomorrow brings, but today I know I want to do this. I know I want to have fun at that party. So I'm going to go to that party, even though I'm super afraid of people judging me. I'm super afraid if maybe I'm going to become sick at that party. I want to live my life right now because I do not know what tomorrow holds.
Yes, it's like doing, and I share that a lot with my clients as well when it comes to anxiety or anything like that, where it's like there's only growth in uncomfortability. And we know that, but it's also not easy at all. And that's why working with a therapist, especially someone who is specializing in OCD, is so important. So I'm really glad that you busted the myth that like you can't just go to any therapist and start working on OCD.
Right.
Yeah. So what is the final myth?
Let me see. So we spoke about cleanliness and organization and how that's like the big myth with the OCD community. The pure O, we have that there is more to OCD, that there's harm, sexual, religion, relationship, fear of vomit, and so forth. Then we spoke about OCD is not just the treatment for just talk therapy. There's ERP in there. And then the final one, let's see, is OCD is not psychosis. So I think I spoke about that too. That how it's not about that they're going to cause harm or that they're going psychotic. So I
Mhm.
think I mixed that into one of the other ones. But those are like the five main myths that I hear about day to day.
Hi, my name is Gordon Gooding. I'm the founder and director of the Gooding Wellness Group here in Cold Spring Harbor, New York. We are a group of mental health providers that offer individual and family counseling here on Long Island. We believe the first step for caring for your mental health is to talk and to learn about it, which is what this podcast does such a great job of. If it has a name, someone else has been through it, and so can you. If you ever need a professional that cares about what you are facing, please feel free to reach out to us. Our counseling services are available throughout New York State through our teletherapy service, and we also offer in-person sessions in our beautiful offices here on Long Island, New York. You can reach us at goodingwellness.com or by calling 631-351-2940. Remember, there's nothing that you need to face alone. Until then, keep listening, be deliberate with your mental health, and keep it honest.
Yeah. And I actually have a question going off of kind of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference? Because I don't think many people know this, that there's something called obsessive compulsive personality disorder, that there's OCPD. So what's the difference between OCPD and OCD?
Yeah, so OCPD, right, is a personality disorder. So it's something that really focuses on the personality itself. I don't know much about it because since it is a personality disorder and I don't focus much on that area, but it really has to do with something that is not going to change. Like no matter what you do in treatment, that person is very resistant to any of that. People who have OCD really want to change. Like they really want to change these behaviors and they're really afraid of them. And it's something that causes them a lot of distress in their life. Compared to a personality disorder, it's something you're kind of like putting out there, right? When somebody with OCD, it's like it's something you don't have any control over and you want to get rid of, but it's very hard for you to get rid of it. So don't quote me on that because I don't know much about the personality side, but I can always get back to you on that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense where it sounds like there's a little bit more awareness of like, okay, this is making my life unmanageable. I need to find a way to get out of this with the OCD and maybe with the OCPD. It's like with, it happens with personality disorders. It's kind of like, what's going on? Like this isn't causing me an issue. It's kind of just like becoming a part of them. And it's hard to see which one is real and which one's not.
Right.
So going more into the treatment aspect, which we spoke about a little bit, can someone, like, let's say, live a life without OCD? Like, is it treatable? Is it something that you just kind of need to maintain? Or like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question because the reality is that you can live with OCD. What happens is when someone comes to, most clients that come to your office, like they're going to come very severe, a severe case. OCD from treatments and research that has been done for years and years shows that it's not something that's cured. You can't say, I am cured from OCD. Like this is non-existent in my life. It's kind of like when you have major depressive disorder, it's like it's on remission, right? Yeah. OCD is kind of similar. Like we want to get to a point where we realize that those intrusive thoughts may still be there, but they're not affecting us the way they did on day one. So you're able to live life more manageable, where it's like you may still have like that red flag that pops up and says, oh, should you really touch that? I don't know. And then you say, you know what? It is what it is. Like I'm having a good time. I want to touch it. Everybody else is touching it. It's going to be all right. And you go for it. Right? So I think one of the biggest things is realizing that OCD is treatable and people live very successful, good, healthy lives, even though they still have OCD. It doesn't have to be that you're failing out of classes, that you're failing out of work or you're getting fired or you're not able to sustain a relationship. Like when those things are happening is when you know that OCD is really taking over your life and that can be treated. But can it be cured? That's a really strong word. So I would say probably not, but you can live with it and you can definitely learn that it does not have to rule your life.
And thank you for kind of aligning that with when we kind of think of depression or even addiction or anything like that. It's like we have things that'll help it that we won't have to suffer with those symptoms on the day to day, but we might get little hints of symptoms here and there, but we just have the tools to cope with it. I'm wondering, like, in addition to the ERP, is there anything else that goes into the treatment that you feel like is like extremely beneficial that almost maybe without it is like, don't know if it'll be working?
It's the response prevention part. that is the biggest part of ERP. Like aside from doing exposures and learning about OCD, it really is the response prevention. Like how do we know that maybe we're going backwards a little bit? How can we prevent ourselves from going down that cycle or that repetitive behavior pattern? So seeking help, let's say you're out of treatment and you're like, okay, I've been doing good. I decreased in treatment. I went from like weekly to every other week to monthly, then to a couple of times a year, and I'm done. It's like when you notice things are spiking up again for you to go back to treatment and realizing what are the things that work for you is what's going to keep you stable and moving forward. So knowing that it's okay to go back into counseling when needed. I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, I don't want to be in therapy forever. You don't need to be in therapy forever. When you did it and you got it, you're out. And then when you need it again, you just come back. So I think that's one of the biggest things is the response prevention of ERP that really allows us to move forward and to stop and say, wait, let me think about this first and see what do I need to do in this situation.
So you have to be very much like an active participant
Yes.
in the process, even when, let's say, you're done, quote unquote, with the treatment.
Exactly. So it's like, you're like, I always tell this to all my clients, like, I want you to be your mini therapist. Like, I don't always want to be there. And I say this many times to many people,
Yeah.
like, it's the same thing with ERP. Like, we want little mini ERP therapists on your shoulder and saying like, all right, what's going on here? Are you aware that you just maybe started doing a compulsion? Right. And then really sitting with that a little bit. So yes, that's definitely very essential. And aside from ERP, like they're getting a lot of attention around ACT,
Oh, yes.
acceptance commitment therapy, right?
Mhm.
So I always like to start with something more simpler in the beginning. Like I provide clients psychoeducation, what that looks like. I don't want them to feel, like I said, they're in fear factor. So I really try to work off of like their strengths, what they're good at, and all that nice stuff, right? To get them comfortable in the room. Because as we know, you need rapport first. So
Mhm.
once I have a client who trusts me, that's when I really do more of the ERP. But along the way, we want to make sure that clients are aware of their strengths and accepting the uncertainty, accepting, the flaws of life and knowing that everything is a hit or miss, right? And nothing is a guarantee. So I think sometimes acceptance commitment allows ERP to seem a little more cushiony, right? A little bit more softer and not so like, well, you got to do this or else I don't know what you're going to do, right? So I think sometimes people go to like ERP therapists who are very strict ERP and they're like very strong and adamant about it. And that could be a little bit of a pushback for people. So just find someone who works well with you, is what I say. Like, there's different types of therapists for every, condition. Same thing for OCD. Not every therapist who specializes in OCD is the same.
Mhm. That's really good to know. It's kind of like finding your right fit, which I talk about all the time, is like finding your right fit. Even if you have a few therapists that do specialize in OCD, it's like you want a little bit of that rapport building first, or you're the type of person that you want to just get right into it.
That's
Yeah,
it.
just want to get
Go
into it. Yeah. Well, this has been so helpful and has educated me. So tell us a little bit about your practice and I guess how you work with individuals with OCD, where people can find you, what else you specialize in.
Yeah, so I have a practice in Huntington, New York. We do in person and also virtual. And I specialize in working with moms during the pregnancy and postpartum period, as well as children and adolescents with OCD. So a lot of the work we do really is exposure response prevention. I do a lot of CBT, but we try to be careful. And this is something I always tell therapists, like just because you know CBT does not mean you know OCD, right? So I think a lot of times what happens with therapists and in our community, we say, oh, I know CBT, so I can treat this. But there's a lot of things within CBT that can actually harm treatment within OCD. So we got to be very careful about that. So that's a little bit about what I do. And you can find me online on Instagram, either at balancemhc.mhc or Facebook, same thing, balancemhc. And our website is balancemhc.com.
Awesome. I know I always refer people to you. Like whenever I get referrals for
Thank you.
OCD, I'm like, Tanairy.
I know we love what we do. Like it's such good work. And, I found this field a couple of years ago. I've always done OCD and I tell people like there was something that felt like was missing. And for me, it really was getting trained with IOCDF to really give me that guidance of like, this is what you were missing. And now I feel like I'm on the right track.
Awesome. It always feels good when you like find your niche and then you kind of just
Oh,
keep going.
yeah,
Oh, it's like the best.
it is.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you like this episode. And again, if you want to have your question answered or your requested topic talked about on an episode, you can submit it via email at letsbehonest@goodingwellness.com or DM me at letsbehonestpod on Instagram. And please follow and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and review, rate, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next time.